The 620th edition of the Four Corners podcast starts right now.
This is the Four Corners podcast.
Elton ready on his second attempt. That one is no good. They battle for it. Loose ball. Recovered Marvin. He scores. 17 seconds left. And he was fouled. Here we go. Lawson with a runner. No. The rebound. Hansbrough at the gun. Got it.
They were 4 for 24.
Hansbrough on a switch on Paulus. A deep three. And Green rips down the rebound in traffic. 4-on-1.
What a great job. What a terrific job in transition. I mean, you couldn't plan that any better as a coach.
Tipped away by Johnson. It's loose. Page. Johnson.
They're dancing in the aisles. They're high-fiving. They're celebrating. They're going bananas on Franklin Street.
Pass to Britt, 15 seconds to play. Up high to Page, gets a screen from Meeks. Page driving in on the left, high off the glass for two. Louisville with 7 seconds. Jones has it, goes left corner, Black's here for three. Back iron, 1 second to play. Stick up, no! Carolina wins it! The Tar Heels win it! 72-71. 6 seconds to go. Pinson comes front court. Pinson to May for the win. Got it! Luke May! He got it! 0.3 of a second! Luke May gives Carolina the 75-73 lead. Are you kidding me?
Inside 30 overall. Love, top of the key. Oh! Big time delivery.
Here are your hosts, Josh Marlowe and Anthony Pagnotta.
Hello and welcome into another edition of the Four Corners podcast. We are powered by Carolina Electrical Services. Josh Anthony here with you guys on a Monday night. Here to get you ready for Carolina and Kentucky in the ACC SEC Challenge, which will come your way tomorrow night. That's Tuesday night, 9:30 p.m. over on ESPN. We'll tell you everything you need to know about the Wildcats. Look at this game from Carolina's perspective. We've got the first batch of net rankings that we'll talk about. We'll discuss which starter needs to step up to get Carolina back on track and give our keys to the game and so much more. But we start every edition of the pod, as we always do, with the pod thought of the day. We go to Michael Jordan for that pod thought. That thought is, quote, "To be successful, you have to be selfish or else you never achieve. And once you get to your highest level, then you have to be unselfish. Stay reachable, stay in touch, don't isolate," end quote. And, trying to find a good quote after the disappointing loss to Michigan State back on Thanksgiving. And I think, Carolina needs to be selfish within the team concept. That means I think Caleb Wilson needs to be selfish in finding his shots. I think Henry Bissar needs to be selfish in knowing when it's okay for him to attack and when it's okay for him maybe not to. I think it's a really important message for Kyan Evans, someone that Carolina needs to start playing at the level that they thought he was going to play at upon his recruitment and the transfer portal. Same thing with Luka Bokovac, and this can go up and down the roster. But I do think there's been a little bit too unselfishness of play, which sometimes can be a bad thing because I think sometimes being unselfish leads to players being tentative. And the environment Carolina is walking into, how big this game feels like it is, just where they can kind of set the tone for the rest of the non-conference season. You need your guys to play selfishly at a high level, but one that does so within, the team structure, which could help Carolina get a much needed and massive win on the road tomorrow night.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying. I think you definitely want certain guys to be a little more selfish than other guys on this team. I mean, when it comes to Caleb Wilson, when it comes to Henry Vassar, yeah, you're looking at those guys and you're saying, I need there to be moments where you guys are a little bit selfish, where you guys are saying, give me the basketball, let me go to work because I am the best offense that this team has right now. But you're also looking for those unselfish moments for them to try to get their teammates involved. Guys like Kyan Evans, who needs to bounce back from the performance that he had against Michigan State. Luka Bogovac, who, you just want to see be more confident. I think that's really the biggest thing about this game is that last year we talked about Carolina coming out of the holiday tournament having lost all confidence, and they never were really able to gain it back. Well, this is a chance to be able to do that against a Kentucky team that is not off to the greatest start. Not bad, not terrible. I mean, they're not a team that, Carolina, if they pick up a win over them, wouldn't be able to consider a quad one opponent by the end of the season, not by any stretch. This is a team that's still going to have probably an incredibly successful season for Kentucky, and still, a team that's going to be a threat in the SEC this year to win the conference and potentially make noise in the NCAA tournament. But you want to see a confident Carolina team. You want to see a team that knows that they can come out and win this game. Don't look like a team that we saw last year going into matchups like this, where it looked like they just knew they weren't going to be able to win the game, or they were going to be trailing by a massive deficit, and then they would have to claw their way back into the game. That's not necessarily what we saw against Michigan State from Carolina, but I do think that, you're looking for this to be a confident unit going up against a Kentucky team that if they get a win over them, that would give them 2 signature wins here early in the season, and will get things turned back in the right direction. Even though right now it's just one loss. That's the thing that people have to understand, but it can fester, especially with the schedule that you have coming up. So Carolina's got to be careful.
Yeah, this is the matchup of arguably the 2 most expensive rosters that we know about in college basketball. Carolina's roster comprised of $14 million. Kentucky's roster, I think it topped out north of 20 million. So you got about $36 million in combined talent going to be on the floor tomorrow night. And look, with some of the losses that Kentucky has suffered so far this year, their rival to Louisville, they lost to the same Michigan State team that beat Carolina. They're kind of in the spot where Carolina was a year ago, where a lot of expectation early, and they had some losses. And Mark Pope, after that loss to Michigan State, was a man that was lost for words and didn't quite know how to handle his first real crisis on the job back at his alma mater. So for as much pressure that there is on Carolina to respond, there's pressure on Kentucky as well to finally look like the team that they spent on in the offseason. We'll set the scene for the matchup. Carolina 25-18 all time against the fellow Blue Blood, although they are just 6-8 in Lexington and just 2-5 in Rupp Arena. But Carolina's 25 wins against Kentucky are tied for the most by a non-SEC opponent. Indiana also has 25 wins against the Wildcats. You look at this year's Kentucky team, they bring with them into this game a 5-2 record. They're still ranked 18th in the AP poll. All 5 of their wins, though, have come at home against Nichols, Valparaiso, Eastern Illinois, Loyola of Maryland, and Tennessee Tech. They lost both their power conference games at Louisville and on a neutral floor to Michigan State back in the Champions Classic. They have 5 players that currently average double-figure scoring, led by the Florida transfer Denzel Aberdeen. He's averaging 14 points per game, 4.3 rebounds, 3.4 assists. He's shooting 53% from the field and 39% from 3. Otega Owe, the preseason SEC Player of the Year, their second leading scorer, 13 points per game, 3.7 rebounds, 2.3 assists. He's shooting 47% from the field, 32% from 3. Colin Chandler, their third leading scorer, at 11.7 points, 3.6 rebounds, 2.9 assists. He's shooting 51% from the field and a whopping 49% from 3. Muhammad Diabate is their fourth leading scorer, at 11.6 points per game, 5.8 rebounds, 1.2 assists. He's shooting 62% from the field. The thing to note about him is he's only played in 5 of the 7 games so far for the Wildcats. And then Malachi Moreno, the last guy to average double figures, he's doing so averaging 10.6 points, 7.6 rebounds, 2.0 assists. He's shooting 59% from the field. Some other notes that stand out from Kentucky, they're third in defensive rebounds per game at 33.6. They're fourth in total rebounds at 46.3. They're eighth in assists per game at 20.6. Teams are shooting just 36% from the field against the Wildcats. That's the 6th best mark in all of college basketball. They're 11th overall in KenPom. Their adjusted offensive efficiency is 121.8, which is 17th. Their adjusted defensive efficiency is 94.9. That's good for 12th in the sport. And in the first batch of the net rankings, they check in at a healthy number 15. So you look at this roster, you see a bunch of double-digit scorers. You see a team that rebounds at a high level. You see a team that defends at a high level. And even though they've struggled in their 2 games against power conference competition so far, as we mentioned, the road loss to Louisville, the loss to Michigan State, where they just did not really compete at all with the Spartans, they've got the talent, they've got the depth to give Carolina a challenge tomorrow night when they visit Rupp Arena.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this team is incredibly challenging on paper. The thing that really bodes well for Carolina is that they're looking for their first win against a power conference opponent. So they haven't necessarily been great when they've played in those games. But, I mean, you look at this group and you look at all the guys that are playing for them. Now, I don't know what Jalen Lowe's status is going to be for this game. We'll have to see whether or not he's going to play. Of course, that's a name that Tar Heel fans should be relatively familiar with coming from Pittsburgh. But everybody else, I mean, you're talking about 10 to 11 guys that they can put into the game and that can have an effect on the game. That's how deep this roster is at this point. So, I mean, there's going to be a lot of guys that Carolina's got to be prepared for. You know that their bench is probably going to outscore you, so you have to be able to counteract that with your starters in this game. You know, it also is going to be a really big test on the glass because, as you mentioned, this is a team that comes in averaging 46.3 rebounds per game, which is 4th in the country. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, defensive rebounding, they are phenomenal. Offensive rebounding, not bad either. They're 103rd in the country. So that's still an area that they probably feel like they can improve on. But that's still a pretty solid number. So Carolina is going to have to be really good on the defensive glass if they want to find a way to win this game. And then you mentioned the fact that they are 6th in opponents' field goal percentage allowed this year at 35.8. You look at the 2-point percentage that they're allowing to opponents, just 42.6. That tells me that they are contesting everything at the rim. No matter what it is, they are contesting it. Their block number isn't incredibly high at 4.6. It's 62nd in the country. But at the same time, they are going to be looking to alter every shot that they can put up. And as you said, this is a team that moves the basketball just as well as the team that you just played in Michigan State. Now, for the most part, you actually made the ball stick a little bit against Michigan State. It was just that guys were able to make shots. Part of it was that there were communication issues for Carolina on the defensive end of the floor at times when it came to switches. Got to be a lot better in this game because there are so many guys that can hurt you in this one. But, you know, at the same time, this is a team that, you know, the first 2 opponents that they've played so far in non-conference play, I mean, there have been moments in the game where, both teams had pretty significant leads over Kentucky. Kentucky was able to close it back in the game against Louisville, never were really able to do it in the game against Michigan State. So if you're Carolina, this is not an immovable force, but this is a team that's really, really good and is going to provide a test. You've got to be ready for a fight in this game because this Kentucky team looks at this as one of their last opportunities before they go into conference play. So you need to be prepared for that.
Yeah, and what you see defensively from them, really dates back to what they did the back half of last year when they really turned it on and became a team that would eventually make it to the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Up until that point, they were what the stats suggest, a high-flying, free-flowing offense, which they are. This team can score. They will look to score, and they're going to want to create many a possession, but they've also committed more on that end of the floor as well to being a better defensive side. And so Carolina needs to be prepared for, I think, a high possession game and a game that is going to see points scored, but also understand that they're going to compete every possession and really make life difficult. So I think it's what you want to see when you see these two programs tangle. There's a lot of talent. You're going to see, I think, high-level offense from both sides with some great competition defensively, and it should create, a fantastic game and what's going to be a pretty lively environment inside Rupp Arena. You look at this game from Carolina's perspective, they bring with them a 6-1 record, and they remained 16th in the AP poll even after that loss last week down in Fort Myers, Florida. This is, though, Carolina's first true road game of the season. They opened up with a 5-game homestand. Then they played those 2 games on a neutral floor last week in Fort Myers. The Heels have 3 players currently averaging double figures in scoring, led by the freshman Caleb Wilson's 19.9 points, 9.9 rebounds. So practically he's averaging 20 and 10, 2.1 assists, and he's doing so while shooting 59% from the field, 25% from 3. Henry Vassar is averaging 15.9 points, 8.3 rebounds, 1.7 assists, and he is shooting 65% from the field and 43% from 3. And the last double-digit scorer that's active with Seth Trimble still injured, he is averaging 12 points per game, 2.6 rebounds, 3.4 assists. He's shooting 38% from the field and 32% from 3. Some numbers on Carolina. Teams are shooting just 39% against the Heels from inside the 3-point line. That's the second best mark in the country. Ken Palm, Carolina finds himself 31st overall. Their offensive rating of 117.8 is just 45th in the country, and their defensive rating of 98.6 clocks them in at 33rd. And we mentioned that Kentucky was 15th in the net. Carolina comes in at 26, so just right outside the top 25 in the net. Part of that is they've got just the one, high major win against Kansas because you got the loss to Michigan State. But, this stuff can be inflated by blowing out opponents like Carolina has with the 2 40-point wins on their roster or on their schedule so far. So that's a look at both teams. Let's go ahead and get, into our discussion topic here really quickly. And we'll piggyback off the net stuff because now that the net ranking is out and the net ranking is here, this will be something that we will monitor all the way up until Selection Sunday. A Selection Sunday, we hope, that doesn't have a Heels team on the bubble. But, you look at this game and Kentucky being 15th in the net, that registers as a quad 1 game for Carolina because it's got to be a top 30 game or a top 50 game. I believe it's away from home. Carolina 1-1 in these situations, right now with the Kansas game and then the Michigan State game. We understand that even though the ACC looks poised to bounce back this year, there's 8 teams in the initial top 50 of the net ranking. You don't know how much those games will guaranteed to be quad 1, quad opportunities once you get into conference play. You hope that the ACC remains where it is, but there's no guarantee as this stuff fluctuates. How important would it be for Carolina to go ahead and secure a second quad 1 victory this early in the season with more opportunities to come, still in non-conference play, but also just not knowing what the ACC schedule will provide later this year?
Well, and not knowing what the rest of the non-conference schedule holds in terms of what those teams look like at the end of the year. I mean, Georgetown is playing well now, but when you get to conference play, who's to say that they don't, have a tough season there, or, even just an average season there. And then all of a sudden that game, which needs to be, they have to be top 25 to count as a quad one win, or top 30, to count as a quad one win, since that game's at home for Carolina. That's when you're really starting to play with fire. And we don't know that Kansas is going to be top 30. You look at the last few years for Kansas, and especially down the stretch of conference seasons, they've fallen apart. We don't know what this team is going to look like. We got the report earlier today that Darren Peterson is not going to sit out. So maybe that's a step in the right direction. The hope is that he'll be back on the court here soon for Kansas, and that could allow that team to maybe be successful this year. But this one would be massive, because there is almost no way that this is not going to be a quad one game. What you were thinking of is the neutral site game. That's a 1 through 50 in terms of, the quad one wins. That's where you're hoping Ohio State ends up landing in that range when Carolina plays them at a neutral site. That's what Michigan State would have been if you would have found a way to beat them in a neutral site. Would have found it hard to believe that the Spartans would have fallen below 50th. So that one hurts. But this is a 1 to 75 range for a quad one victory. I find it really hard to believe that Kentucky is going to fall outside of the top 75 in the net rankings. So that means that if you find a way to win this game, you pretty much secure yourself with a quad one win guaranteed. And then, it's up to what Kansas does this season. But I mean, what they've done without Darren Peterson so far, they've picked up some pretty significant wins. The Players Era tournament actually worked out pretty well for them. And so when you look at it, that's a game that, looks like it could be a quad one for you as well. To have 2 quad one wins going into the ACC would be absolutely massive, because when you look at the rest of the ACC, you've got Louisville, who you feel comfortable is going to be a quad one opponent that you're going to face. Duke, who you feel comfortable is going to be quad one. But then you're going into, Virginia, who's 31st in the net. Clemson, who's 34th. We don't necessarily know what exactly they're going to be. Some of these teams, the good news is we'll learn more about them this week, because this is the ACC SEC Challenge. So we'll learn a little bit more about these teams. But even a team that people thought preseason was going to be really good, the NC State Wolfpack are 40th. So that's a game that doesn't necessarily, which Carolina plays them on the road this year, I believe. That's a game that would probably be a quad one win, but you never really know. You don't know what exactly is going to happen to that team. So the ACC is off to a solid start, but you can't necessarily bank on that if you're Carolina. Let's go out. Let's get this second quad one win, and let's really put to bed any of the conversations about this team once again being on the bubble. I think if you win this game, that's a statement right there, because you'll have this win, you'll have the Kansas win, and that would really be a statement to the rest of college basketball that you are going to be comfortably in the NCAA tournament. Are you going to be competing to win the ACC? Think we'll have to see that. Still see whether or not that's going to necessarily be the case. This would have me feeling relatively confident that that's going to happen. And it could still be a message to the rest of college basketball that you are a team that is going to be a problem come March. So hopefully that's what we see in this game from Carolina, that they're motivated to come out and make a statement.
Yeah, I think, this is an opportunity game, and it's one that Carolina can take the opportunity to secure a second quad one win and really start to build a non-conference resume like they were able to do 2 years ago, which was able to position them for, a 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. And that's why you want to play in these games, but playing in them only matters so much. You do have to win them. And you got to remember, last year, Carolina was 1-11 in quad one. Like, you have a chance in the first month of the year to secure more quad one wins than you did all of last year. And look, 1-11 was good enough to get Carolina into the field, but they were the last team in, and it's why it was such a hot debate with some of the teams that got left out. I thought Carolina was one of the better at-large teams, on the bubble, but their metrics, some metrics were good, some metrics weren't good. This is what we live and die by now when we evaluate these teams. Like, yes, I'm going to give you your KenPom numbers, and we'll mention Bart Torvik and we'll mention Evan Miyakawa at different times. But the net is the end-all, be-all. And so for Carolina to come in 26, and they're 1-1 in quad one is a pretty good start to them kind of, building a much more better NCAA tournament resume than they have in outside of their lone year where, they were a bona fide 1 seed. So that's what this game, represents, is what this game offers. And hopefully Carolina is up to the challenge. When you look at this game individual or specifically, we know Carolina's compromised. Like we know that's the reality of the situation without Seth Trimble. We heard head coach Hubert Davis say today that he's, progressing in the right direction. He's already starting to do some individual drills, dribbling, shooting, so on and so forth. So that kind of backs up what Seth said, that he's a quick healer and he would be back even sooner than what that timeline would suggest. Carolina needs more from its starters. And I think it's hard to ask more from your two big men in Visar and Caleb Wilson, who have been the backbone of this team through the first month or so of the season. So when you look at the other three starters collectively, Kyan Evans, Luka Bogovac, and then Jaron Stevenson, which starter do you think needs to pick his game up the most starting tomorrow night to help get Carolina back on track?
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer is Kyan Evans. That's the guy that I think everybody's going to point to and they're going to look at and say, it just hasn't been good enough from him. I think what you're hoping for is that at some point he is going to find consistency, because to me, I don't think it's that he hasn't been good enough. There have been some games where he's been really good, where he's done some things that we really like. He's able to stretch the floor for Carolina. That's what you're hoping to get from him, is that really his game is the ability to shoot the ball from beyond the arc. That's, it's 2 of the last 3 games that Carolina's played. All but one of his field goal attempts have come from beyond the arc. So it just shows you that that's where he lives and dies. Now, unfortunately, that's what takes away from Carolina's ability in the half court, is because they don't have somebody that can put pressure on the rim out of that guard spot. So, I mean, you'd like for him to be able to do that. I've seen moments from him where it looks like he's able to do that, but you just need to see it more consistently. So, I mean, that's the layup answer. I'm not going to say outside the box answer, but the other answer is Luka Bogovac. You need him to be the guy that you thought you were getting when you got him from the Adriatic League, which is a guy that could potentially lead this team in scoring, a guy that can put a little bit more pressure on the rim. Now, for him, he's not nearly as quick a foot, so he's going to have to be a little bit smarter about how he gets to the basket. But that's what you want to see, is his ability to put the ball on the floor, really the ability to just create in the half court. Because Carolina, that's the thing, is that you're relying so much on your big men that when people are able to take them away, you don't have any other options on the perimeter that can consistently knock down shots. Luka was supposed to be that guy for you because he was older, because he played in a professional league, and you're hoping that that's something that shows up as the season goes along. So those are the 2 guys that I look at. To me, I think even more so than Kyan Evans, I think it's really Luka Bogovac. He's got to be the guy that you thought he was going to be, create some offense for you in that half-court setting. And if he can do that, then I think Carolina has a really good chance to win this game against Kentucky.
Yeah, and if you go back, there were times in that second half where Carolina was allowing him to initiate the offense, and they were playing Kyan Evans off the ball, which I don't hate. I think you get Kyan, off the ball, just take some pressure off of him, kind of run some Spain action or whatever to free him up to get some catch and shoot from the outside. I kind of like that because Carolina needs him to score. They need him to start to hunt his offense. But I think it does come down to Luka. He was the guy that, we raved about once Carolina added him, about making this roster complete and really giving this team a chance to emerge as legitimate contenders, both within the ACC and nationally. And, right now, 12 points per game is solid, but the efficiency just has not been there. He's shooting under 40% from the field and, just 32% from behind the 3-point line. And look, had he not played the first week or two, So maybe some of this would have been explained and justified. But that's not the case. He was able to play in every single game Carolina has played, and they used him a whole lot, in the preseason, albeit in the 2 exhibitions. But regardless, he has to be better. And I think they kind of go hand in hand. I think if Luka plays better and starts putting more pressure on the defense, it'll make the game easier for Kai and Evans. And I think that's something that we got to remember, that what we're looking at with Kai, no, it's not been good enough. He needs to play better. There's no doubt about that. But he's also not playing with the backcourt mate that we thought he was going to. And the last time he did was in that second half against Kansas. And you saw Kai and Evans play his best basketball off of Seth Trimble, who was sensational in that second half. So you would imagine with some time off and some time back in the gym, Carolina will have tinkered with some things and try to get both those guys going, because you can't really ask for much more from Caleb Wilson, from Henry Vassar, after what they've done here the first handful of games. With that, let's go ahead. Let's transition into our keys to the game before we make our predictions. The first key I wrote down was defend the 3-point line, just because with Kentucky, man, they're going to want to attack inside and out, and you really got to be mindful of them in transition with the way that they use analytics. They're very much kind of like Alabama, where they're going to push for 2, but if they get a transition 3 opportunity, they're gonna look to take that as well. And you look at some of the guys on their roster, just about everybody is capable of taking the 3. And you guys like Aberdeen and Colin Chandler, both those guys are shooting right at 40% or above. So they're going to take this 3-point shot, and they're going to be very efficient with the 3-point shot. Carolina's been kind of hit or miss. Michigan State shot 50% from the field, but then again, they only took 10 threes. You're going to see a higher volume of perimeter shots in this game, no doubt. With that being said, though, you've got to close down and contest shots in a way that you didn't do against the Spartans back on Thanksgiving night.
Yeah, you're hoping that you see more threes, because you're hoping that you do a good job of taking away the paint, where in the game against Michigan State, Carolina did not. They gave Michigan State basically anything that they wanted in the paint for, certain stretches in that game. You're hoping that this game it's a little bit different, and that, they do end up having to play on the perimeter, but there you've got to be really good defensively as well. And this is where not having Seth Trimble really hurts, because if Carolina had him, they have a guy that can defend just about anybody on that perimeter. This is a big game, I think, for Jaren Stevenson to bounce back, because he didn't look great matched up against Cohen Carr, an incredibly athletic guy at that 3 spot. Now, how does he look matched up in this game with some of the guys that Kentucky's going to throw at him? I think that's going to be really interesting. I think, he for the most part this year has been really good at defending the perimeter, despite being 6'10". I think you need to see that again in this game from him, and you need this team just all around to be really good on that end of the floor. That's where, a guy like Jonathan Powell coming off the bench can be huge for you as well. Luka Bogovats, not necessarily known for being a great defender. That's where, when Jonathan Powell is in the game, you're hoping to steal some good defensive possessions with him on the floor. Hopefully this is a game where Carolina is keeping their eyes on this 3-point shooting attack for Kentucky. I mean, it is a team that shoots it at a very high clip in terms of the number of 3-point shots that they shoot per game as well. So Carolina's got to be prepared. They're going to be throwing them up. You got to make sure that you're out there contesting those shots on the perimeter. And that's the thing, right? If they're contesting them and shots are just falling, then there's nothing you can do about it. It's those ones where guys are left wide open that are really frustrating. And you need to make sure, especially with a guy like Colin Chandler, who is shooting 49% from beyond the arc, you need to make sure that you're closing out strong against him and trying to limit what he can do on the perimeter.
The second key to the game is a very specific one. Carolina needs to limit turnovers, period. They got to limit the live ball ones, because this is a team that they thrive off of live ball turnovers, because it gets that transition game going. And I mentioned they want to play up and down. They want a free-flowing game. They're very comfortable playing games in the 80s, the 90s, and we saw different times last year, man. They get into the hundreds in conference games against the likes of the Floridas, the Alabamas of the world. Usually, I think Carolina would be comfortable playing that way, and I think Carolina wants to run. They don't have the scoring punch though that Kentucky does. So I think they probably want to win the race to 80. But if this game gets into the 90s, into the 100s, that might favor Kentucky. The best thing to do is to not give them easy points. Is to not give them 6, 8, 10, 12 points off layups or dunks, because you're committing turnovers that allow them to run down the other way without your defense being set. And hopefully they built up what they did against Michigan State, because Michigan State, they took care of the basketball. Then they turned the ball over like 6 times. Like, if you turn it over 6 times, whether you're at home, on the road, neutral site, again, when you're playing a quality opponent, you're going to give yourself a real good chance to win the ball game. That needs to travel, that needs to translate. It starts with Kyan Evans, obviously him being the floor general, but it's Jaren Stevenson, a guy who has struggled with turnovers at times. It starts with Henry Vassar when he gets double teamed, making sure he handles a double team right and kind of plays through the contact as opposed to shying away from it, so on and so forth. So they need to limit the turnovers to begin with, but especially those live ball ones that can create easy points and get that crowd even more energized.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that that's going to be one of the big things. They did a really good job, as you mentioned, against Michigan State of holding on to the basketball. That was one of the things that we couldn't really criticize about their game. It was pretty much, everything else at times in the half court, at least on the offensive end of the floor. This is going to be key in this game because, as you said, this is a team that loves to play with tempo, man. And look, Carolina has that ability to do that, but we've seen it this year. Carolina's not the team that really gets into a lot of those games. They haven't successfully done it so far this year. I mean, not against an opponent that is necessarily as legitimate as Kentucky is going to be. There were moments, I guess, against Kansas where they really started getting the pace going. But Kansas wasn't a team that could get out and run quite the same way that this Kentucky team is going to be able to do. I mean, if you watch that game against Louisville, I mean, that was one of the most up and down games that you're going to see all year long. So this is a team that, they want to get into those types of games, a high possession game where they are, getting plenty of opportunities, trying to get into that 90, 100-point range, as you said. That's what Carolina's got to avoid. Now, the good news is that they are not necessarily a great team at creating turnovers. They only create 11 per game, which is 296th in the country. Steals, they average 7 per game, which is 200th in the country. But the other reason why you need to take care of the ball, this is one of the other things you always look at when you go into a game like this, is because they take care of the basketball at a high rate. They average just 10.6 turnovers per game, which is 66 in the country. So if you're Carolina, you need to make sure that you're holding on to the basketball because the team on the other side does a good job of doing that. They're not necessarily going to turn the ball over to you as much as some of the other teams that you've played so far this year. So if you're giving the ball away, it's unlikely that they're going to give it right back to you. So for Carolina, limit those extra possessions. For Kentucky, there could be some extra possessions coming on the offensive glass, so you don't want it to really start to add up and give Kentucky these extra shots at scoring and really allow this game to get into that high 80s, into the 90s. You're hoping to play this game probably a little bit more in the 70s and limit the possessions a little bit.
All right, the last key to the game piggies back of what you mentioned. They could generate offense through offensive rebounding. Carolina's got to control the glass because if they control the glass, they control the tempo. And this might be my biggest concern entering this game, considering the way that Michigan State beat them on the glass. I think they were +7 back on Thanksgiving. And statistically, they're not the same rebounding team that Kentucky is. Now, maybe Kentucky's numbers are somewhat inflated because of the possessions that they play. So there's just more shots going up on both ends of the floor. But regardless, I mean, they're a great defensive rebounding team. As I mentioned, they're third in defensive rebounds per game, and they're fourth in total rebounds per game. They average over 33 defensive rebounds. They average over 46 total rebounds. Carolina kind of took a dip in those statistics after a bad showing against Michigan State. But they average just a little bit over, 43 rebounds per game. But This to me, this has to be who's that third person that's impacting the game. I think at this point you expect Wilson and Vassar to get to the boards. I mean, those two guys combined are averaging about 17 rebounds per game, which is about a third of Carolina's team total. Who's that other guy? Is this a game where Jaren Stevenson gets to the board and really impacts the game in that way? Is this a game where maybe Jonathan Powell comes off the bench and gives you six, 7 rebounds? Can your guards get to the backboard and impact the game? And that way, it's about, first off, limiting offensive rebounds, because when they offensive rebound, what are they going to do? They're going to kick it out for 3. Again, that's the analytical part of what they're doing. On the flip side, you've got to generate second chance scoring opportunities, because their 2-point defense will tell you it's hard to score on them. It's hard to score on them in the half court. So can you grab some of your misses to get some, easy buckets at the rim, or get some offensive rebound threes of your own right? So, I think, to me, if Carolina's going to win this game, they probably got to be, at worst, even on the glass. I don't see a situation where they get out rebounded and they lose. It's like a football game where, going into it, the line of scrimmage, who runs the ball more is going to win the football game. In this game, whoever wins the battle of the board, I think, is really going to have a great chance, because they'll be able to control tempo, pace, so on and so forth. Henry Vassar, Caleb Wilson are going to rebound. Who's going to be that third guy that emerges for Carolina and impacts the game in that category?
Well, when you're playing a game like this, I think it's everybody that's got to be involved. You look at the way that Kentucky rebounds. There's not a guy that sticks out that you look at and say, man, that dude's just an absolute monster on the glass. Malachi Moreno averages the most for them at 7.6 per game. Brandon Garrison, pretty solid in 20 minutes at 5.6 per game. But it's a community effort. It's everybody is getting to the glass for them. So for Carolina, it's got to be the same way, man. Everybody's got to be bought in on getting to the glass, because, Denzel Aberdeen, 4.3 rebounds per game out of the guard position. Otega Owe, that's a point guard that is averaging 3.7 rebounds per game. So, Carolina just needs the effort all over for everybody to be bought in on getting some of these rebounds. And this is a team that shoots a lot of threes, man. So there's going to be long rebounds. Carolina needs their guards to be able to help them out. It can't all be on Henry Vassar and Caleb Wilson. And even for those guys, man, not necessarily Caleb Wilson, more for Henry Vassar. You've got to pull down the rebounds when they are there for you. You can't be batting the ball around. We've seen him do that at times this year. That can't be what happens in this game, man. You need to go up aggressive, come down with those rebounds, put both hands on the ball and bring it down. That's what you need from this group if they're going to be able to win this game. When you're facing a team that's this good rebounding-wise, the best way to be able to counteract this is to shoot the ball incredibly well on your end of the floor so that it can't pull down defensive rebounds. But as you said, I think that's where we're most worried about Carolina, is on the defensive glass. Offensive glass, I think you'll be fine. I don't think that Carolina is necessarily going to blow anybody away. I don't think this is going to be a game where they pull down like 15, 16 offensive rebounds, something like that. But I think they'll compete in that area. It's what do they do defensively on the glass against this Kentucky team who is just dominating teams on the defensive glass. That's where Carolina needs to show up, or who's just dominating teams on the offensive glass. That's where Carolina needs to show up. They need to have a strong presence there on the defensive glass. That's where you need to, limit those opportunities that you get by pulling down those defensive rebounds. I think Carolina is capable of doing it. Now, let's see if they actually are able to do it in this game against one of the best rebounding teams in the country.
All right. Carolina enters the game with just a 13.8% chance to win. That according to ESPN's analytics. And according to ESPN Bet, Carolina does enter the game. The line is now moved to, they're now 7.5-point underdog. So kind of a big number there for Kentucky. I'll let you go first. Who wins the game and why?
Well, their line is shrinking because originally it was an 8.5-point line. So that's come down. People, I think, are looking at Carolina and thinking they're a little bit better. And so do I. I think they are a better team than people are going to give them credit for. Based off of the net ranking, some people probably look at that and think they're not. But there's a reason this team beat Kentucky or beat Kansas. And I think that's going to be one of the reasons why they have a chance to win this game. I think they're going to be incredibly motivated. A guy like Caleb Wilson is going to want to come out and just wreck shop after, a game against Michigan State where he played well but wasn't perfect. And, he probably feels like that. He probably feels like this is a game where he can come out and really have one of his legacy games, in this one on the road against Kentucky and Rupp Arena. I think he's going to put together a really big performance. I think Henry Vassar will put together a really big performance. And I like Carolina in this game, man. I think the motivation coming off that loss, combined with the fact that I just don't know how good Kentucky is right now at this point. They've got a lot of pieces, but it's a lot of new pieces that are trying to mix together, sort of similar to what Carolina's dealing with. But it feels like pieces like Caleb Wilson and Vassar have already sort of established themselves and established their roles in this offense. I don't know that you have the same thing with Kentucky. I think it's a lot of guys still trying to figure some things out. I do think it will be a pretty high-scoring affair. I think Carolina's offense is able to keep up because I just don't know how great defensively Kentucky is. So I will pick the Tar Heels in this game, in a close one, on the road at Rupp Arena.
Yeah, I got to be honest with you. I've really wrestled with this one. Obviously, if you listen to the pod for quite some time, you know how I feel about Kentucky, how we feel about Kentucky. They're a rival. I don't like them. I don't care for them. Although Mark Pope has done the unthinkable, and he's actually made them he's actually made their program as likable as it's been, I think, really in my lifetime, ever since John Calipari got there and established them as a national power back in the 2010s. But I think it's important for distress. I think this game is winnable. I think this game is one that if Carolina goes in there and wins, you shouldn't be surprised. They've played better Kentucky teams in the past and been competitive and beaten them. And maybe that was taking some people by surprise. I would not be surprised if Carolina comes away with a win tomorrow night. Obviously, my heart tells me Carolina. My head tells me Kentucky because just how important that game is for them and their fan base. But I'm gonna go with my heart. I think Carolina has the best player because I think Caleb Wilson is the best player on the floor. He's got a great cast behind him with Henry Vassar. And I think Luka Bogovac at some point, the Luka that got us all excited from overseas is going to show up. What better way to do that than in Rupp Arena? And what's going to be a great environment for the ACC SEC challenge between two premier programs in the sport. So I'm with you. I think it'll be high scoring. I think it'll be highly competitive. I think Carolina makes a play or two late to come away with a massive, and I mean a massive win, which will just kind of set the scene for the rest of non-conference play and really set the scene for kind of what that Kansas recap was back earlier in November, which was just a fun podcast where we got to talk about a big win. Hopefully that's what we're doing on Wednesday. No matter what happens, we'll have you covered. HeelToughBlog.com, where we'll have coverage for you tomorrow with the game preview. That'll go up the day of the game, obviously with a 9:30 tip. We will be back with you on Wednesday with that game recap as I continue to take you through the hoop season. Pretty busy week for Carolina football now that the season is over. Many players are weighing their decisions to either stay with the program or transfer. We've already seen a handful of people transfer already. Anthony said you covered with all that, and we'll continue to do so as those become known. And it's National Signing Day on Wednesday. A big class expected for Carolina. Full coverage can be found on the website. Once again, that's HeelToughBlog.com. As for the podcast, you guys know where to find us. Every major podcasting platform. Just search the Four Corners Podcast and we'll pop up. There, we encourage you guys rate, review, and subscribe. That way you don't miss any editions of the show. If you consume the podcast from a digital perspective, best way to keep up, like and follow the Facebook page at Heel Tough Blog. Subscribe to the YouTube channel at Heel Tough Blog, or follow me at Twitter at HTB_Josh. The second we go live, you'll be notified on all three of those platforms. you can jump in and be a part of the conversation. But with that, folks, it is going to wrap up this edition of the show. Do want to thank Anthony once again for hosting with me. We want to thank you guys for both watching and listening. And as always, go